It's funny because usually I don't stress at all about our presentations. I love talking about this business. I love what I do. I just think it's amazing. It's really easy to get into it. But when we were talking about these classes, I immediately felt like, oh my God, like this is such specific information. It's while it's technically something that's across the board for the Bay Area, my part is specifically about the East Bay. As Jen mentioned, we have a series that is on microclimates and Bay Area gardening within that and what that means. And I'm doing East Bay, Dan and then Taylor. And how is it so that we didn't end up doing like 14 different, completely different presentations, but also got you the correct information? And so you're gonna have to bear with me today. It's a little bit different than our norm. And there's a couple things that I wanna hit that, like I said, are just not exactly part of the normal nursery biz. And I know it's surprising, but I'm not a meteorologist or anything like that. So of all the things that I do, that's not one. So I learned a lot while I was prepping for this. And it's funny, I took a class in college at Berkeley on oceanography, and it was by far the most fascinating class I've ever taken. I, been a Bay Area resident my entire life. I knew what a big deal the ocean was and how it controlled so much of our weather here, but I had no idea the specifics, and I was just mesmerized. It was, I wish that I had, at some point earlier in my career gone into something like that. Just fascinating. I like to be here on kind of the back end now, but such an interesting topic, and so apropos for there's no place like, in terms of microclimates, like the Bay Area. We are part of an overall Mediterranean climate, of which there are many, 5. I actually did a presentation a while back and we talked about this. There's only 5 locations in the world: California, central Chile, the Mediterranean basin, which is Spain, France, Italy, Greece, and Turkey, the Cape region of South Africa, and then Southwestern and South Australia. So, and then here in the Bay Area, we get the crux of that. Mediterranean climate really just means really hot summers and mild winters. There's this very specificity about what our soil is like, what plants tend to do well here, what our water is like. We tend to have, much less rain than most other climate areas. But again, then as you dial in from the greater California area, the Bay Area is completely different because of these microclimates. So I really had to dig into like, what exactly does that mean? I feel like we say it all the time and we all have this general idea of what exactly that is. So again, I did a little bit of research. Okay, Jen, next slide. Okay, what is a microclimate? So to start off, as you see there on the screen, a microclimate is a local set of atmospheric conditions that differ from those in the surrounding areas, often slightly, but sometimes substantially. It's like saying always, never, or something, it feels like it's completely backwards. But I mean, that really is, the big deal to me. So like, the simple, like dumbed down version of that to me is like this phenomenon of where it can be sometimes be vastly different weather in, what feels like areas that are really close together. I do a lot of running and hiking, and so often I'll be, running along a trail or something and it's cool, and then all of a sudden I'll run into this really warm, amazing patch, and you can feel like these kind of jet stream airs that are really warm and feel tropical. Or sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes it's nice and hot out, and then all of a sudden you get this nice little breeze that is this chilled air that is not really part of what the normal temperature would be for that area. And it is so interesting with this microclimates that that it can be really close by. One of the things that it explained online is that with the Bay Area, microclimates can be like beyond the traditional scales of what is micro. That for us, sometimes it's just like from neighborhood to neighborhood, which is completely different. In the East Bay, because because the areas are so much more spread out than in, like, San Francisco, where you have kind of tight neighborhoods, and there's a lot of, wind flow and stuff like that. On our side of the bay, it's not really the same. So our microclimates are a little bit different, not quite as obvious, but definitely you can tell the difference even just from neighborhood to neighborhood, which I think is fascinating. The rest of the slide is that, microclimates are caused by a few factors that are a really big deal. Things like topography, large bodies of water, and urban areas. The other funny thing that I found is that, they say that with microclimates, it doesn't really follow a line. There is no like map line of, well, in this area of, Danville, or this area of Concord, it's this microclimate. There isn't. Everything they said is very gray, like a lot of gradation between those lines. There is no absolute. It can be street to street, it can be neighborhood to neighborhood. And, obviously this is caused by what, we're just talking about, is this topography, the water, and urban areas. So for large bodies of water, obviously the Bay Area is mostly surrounded, it says, on 3 sides by water, specifically in San Francisco, but that, kind of rolls out, so to speak, from all the way out to the East Bay. So really interesting that much water, is controlling so much of our water patterns and so much of our weather patterns, I'm sorry. But just awesome that that's such a big deal, and how much that influences, just what the temperature is like, how windy it is, our abilities for rain and stuff like that. Super interesting. Then also for topography, there's so many ridges. When I think about the East Bay, we tend to think about it of how many ridges of hills and mountains and kind of ridge lines are you going over to get away as you're leaving, away from the ocean, which is really interesting. And with every ridge line, there's a little bit of change in topography. There's a change in terms of distance from that water, which makes it, there's more places for the fog to stop. There's more places that will kind of create protection and stuff as you get out to the East Bay. So super interesting just what the topography is, coming all the way from, right in the actual Bay Area, around like the Oakland, Berkeley, San Francisco, Marin, everything that's touching water there. Just the differences in how it, severe weather is kind of slowed down as it gets out to the East Bay, which is really cool. It's funny too, when I read that, I realized that, especially when we had these recent storms, there was so much, it always gets so much more rain in the Marin, North Bay areas, and even in San Francisco. And I was often wondering, like, what is that? I mean, is it coming from the north? But it's coming from the water, and there's nothing to stop it. There's not a big mountain range there that really protects that, that North Bay area from all the weather. They're right there. It's coming right through. It comes through the Golden Gate Bridge. They talk a lot about the Golden Gate Bridge in, online as you're studying microclimates in the Bay Area, and how it's kind of the gateway to all of this weather that's coming in. And there is no protection for San Francisco or for a lot of the North Bay. So they really get hit with a lot more of that. And it's why in the East Bay, we tend to see more mild conditions as it pertains to rain. Now, I'm not talking about these latest storms. That was something that we don't see very often, but just in terms of normal rainfall and storm systems, they tend to be not quite as extreme when they're coming from, the ocean side by the time they get all the way out to us, which is pretty cool. And it kind of made me laugh because of that. I was writing down that those ridge lines, like, they keep the marine layer and that fog layer at bay. And I thought, oh, that's funny. I want that term. That must be where that term came from. So it's keeping it literally at the bay and not allowing it to come out our way quite as easily. And then in terms of urban areas, it was really interesting. I was reading that there's a lot of, not only are the tall buildings and stuff like that you would see in the city, not only do they create wind tunnels, and then become kind of part of their own microclimate, but that they also, that those areas will they radiate heat. And so when you're in areas that are, more around like green area, that they kind of absorb that heat. And so a lot of the urban areas struggle with, different kinds of weather patterns because of that. There's a lot of asphalt. And so there's a lot of ricochet of that heat coming off. Not so much in, more of the green areas. So really interesting the way the different things within the Bay Area, and certainly as you're coming toward the East Bay from the city and from the North Bay, what things weather is bumping into and changing it as it, as it comes all the way out to our area. Okay, next slide. So the interesting part here is that so there's the general climate zones. We're talking specifically about microclimates within that, but just so that we're aware of kind of how our area is designated as it pertains to planting, because all of this is fascinating. I'm sure you're thrilled that you got this science talk for the day, but like, how does that pertain to what we're talking about here? All those microclimates work together to kind of build what our zone is for California. As you can see from the slide, there are two kind of governing forces as it pertains to how they look at what our zones are. And the zones are mostly agricultural zones, and that's planting. It's also where things are grown in mass. A lot of our as you're going down towards Southern California in the valleys, when they actually have a lot of agriculture being grown, these distinctions are way more important, and definitely a much bigger deal there. But Sunset Western Garden book and the USDA, which is the Department of Agriculture, they set the standards for what those zones are. The Sunset Western Garden has identified 7 climate zones in and around the Bay Area. Within that, the East Bay covers zones 14, 15, 16, and 17. On this slide, the picture that's to the kind of top right there, that's the sunset zones. And you'll notice that, there's not a huge amount of distinction as you kind of pull away from the, the more San Francisco Bay Area near Berkeley, Oakland, etc. But there is a decent amount of difference the further away you get. So, just super interesting and the fact that it covers so many zones, even just for the East Bay. I mean, again, as we were just talking, that's the further you're getting away from the water, whether you're just coming east, whether you're going north or south. Even within the East Bay, there's definitely little changes in terms of, and part of it is just protection from those ridges. Part of it is, buildings and other topography. So really interesting the way that those zones work. And then the USDA, they have 12 plant hardiness zones, which is how they refer to it. And in the East Bay, the zones are like 9A through 10B. I was kind of looking through, and truth be told, it's not vastly different, when you're looking at the East Bay versus San Francisco and Marin. So it's not like we're on different continents. It's not like it's so different that you can't use the same plants, because I think that's really the point of this. Is I was thinking, like, how do you explain this in planting? Like, what does this mean for what we're talking about? Because at the end of the day, you can plant a hydrangea anywhere in the Bay Area, no problem. But if you plant it in San Francisco or in, Oakland or Berkeley, or probably parts of Marin also, you can plant it pretty much anywhere. But when you get out to our side, out in the further East Bay, so I'm talking about like, Dublin, Pleasanton, Livermore, up through Danville and Alamo, all the way up into Concord and Clayton, through all of these areas, you got a lot more sun there. And so that where you can plant that hydrangea now completely changes. And so to me, that's really what the differences are in terms of these zones. When you look at the numbering system that's on plants, it'll say, you know, it's rated for this zone, it's rated for this zone, it has a hardiness zone of whatever. So they're looking at the factors that are a big deal, or how much sun are you getting, and when is it, and how often are you getting frost? Like how cold can these plants stand to be, and exactly how much sun can they take? So it only really limits where you can put the plants that you want to plant. It doesn't, there's definitely some that do better no matter what, but you know, don't feel super limited about what you can put in the ground. Technically, you can plant pretty much anything as long as it's in the right place. Okay, let me make sure I'm hitting everything that I want to hit.
Shannon, do you want to pause for a second and see if there's questions? I can't
sure.
see them while I have the slide up. Okay, so
Okay.
Because I know it's a lot of information. Okay.
No problem.
Okay. So okay, good. No, you're covering it.
Okay. Okay,
That's
good.
a
So
Zoom fault that I can't see the slide and do it through. Okay.
yeah, okay, yeah, you're right, because when it's gone, I can't see any of the Zoom stuff either. So
Okay.
so again, just the differences there are, it's not a restriction so much as something to kind of pull your coattail and make sure that you're thinking about where you're planting these things. You know, the things that kind of direct our planting in the East Bay, anywhere, but specifically in the East Bay, are our soil. You know, our soil has tons of clay in it. It tends to not hold, you know, water as well, or it gets pooled in specific areas. It'll get caught in like really clayey areas. Tends to not be very nutrient rich. It's why we spend so much time, you know, adding fertilizers, adding new fresh soil and other amendments to kind of help change that overall composition of soil. I spend more time talking about soil than I, you know, spend talking about plants at most of our stores, just because it's the beginning. It's the foundation for everything else. It doesn't really matter what you put in the ground if what you're putting it in isn't healthy, isn't in a position to be able to fortify whatever that plant is, and to help feed it and support it and create, you know, a healthy living atmosphere for it. So you definitely want to spend a decent amount of time working on your soil and getting it to a point where you can plant pretty much whatever you want to and not have to worry about it. What else? Weather. So out by us, like I said, extreme heats. It's so hot in the summer, and the summer, you know, when the summer starts and when the heat hits is so different now than it was, you know, when I was young living here in the Bay Area. So when I talk about heat or where you want to plant things, I say, look, in August at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, where is the sun? If the sun is shining on the area that you are talking about, that is a sun area. I don't care what it looks like in the morning. It doesn't matter what it looks like in February. It only matters for our side of the bay what it looks like in the middle, the heat of the year, the heat of the day. So again, to me, August 4 o'clock-ish in the afternoon is the time frame. And I know it's hard because this time of the year, you know, the sun is like way south. It's the trajectory of the sun moving from one side to the other is way south. And as the summer goes on, it'll, you know, it'll scoot up a little bit more northern. I can watch it for where our nursery is. It's so obvious. In the summer, it like sets over one side of the nursery, and in the winter it sets over the other side. So it's kind of cool to be able to watch that progression throughout the year. But again, wherever that sun is, August in the afternoon, that's what you're planning for. So you want to make sure that anything that you're putting there is something that that is a full sun plant. In most cases, that's anywhere between 3 to 8 hours, but you know, you really want to just be careful that you're paying attention to what those time frames are. You don't want something that says morning sun. You don't want something that's like, you know, just a few hours. Those areas are the real deal. And then as it pertains to like shade areas, that can also be technically sun plants, but it's the ones that are partial sun, that are okay with up to 3 hours of sun. You know, those will do just fine in an area like that. And again, just because of the way that where the sun hits and the time of day and how strong it is in our area. Again, if I was talking about Oakland or Berkeley or San Francisco, it would be completely different. But as it pertains to the East Bay and certainly out as far as we are, you have to, everything is based on the sun. So good soil, really paying attention to what the weather is, where you're planting. And then, like I said, with plants, you don't have to be limited. You just have to really be cognizant of where you're putting things and how to put them in the places that are going to ensure that, you know, they do the best. And I was looking at, I was talking to Dan, who was going to do, you know, the Marin side, the North Bay of this same conversation next week. And he had like kind of a full list of plants that are off of the, and I'll show you in resources, kind of places where you can look to get specific recommendations. And he had several plants that were listed that were on for Marin that I was thinking, we sell those, you know, in our store, we sell them on our side of the bay. They're all the same plants. There's definitely some on for him because it's a little more coastal where, you know, there's some differences that way, but so many of these will transfer, you know, this way if you're paying attention to, you know, again, just those few things, your soil, the weather, where that sun is, and just what your placement is, you know, picking a really good spot for things to be. Was there any questions about like planting or anything that I've said so far? I just want to make sure that before I kind of get over to resources that I'm not bothering anybody. I wonder, can I test it too?
Okay, no questions so far. I think you're
Okay.
covering it good. I mean, I to support the points that you're making,
Right.
I would just say that it's true that you can grow the same plant throughout the bay, but it's going to require different conditions based on your microclimate. So
Yeah.
in something like the East Bay that is hotter and drier, it might need more water, or it might need less sun or
For sure.
something like that. And it's just important to be able to, you know, watch how your plant's reacting, I guess. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so then the last slide is really the resources. I'm sorry to keep having you jumping back and forth, Jen. I apologize, but I want to just make sure that those are there in case anybody wants to screenshot it and I know that it will be up later. So just in terms of resources, because again, I mean, this is not, it's not so different from one place to the other, but it's absolutely something that you should add to your toolkit of, you know, when you're planning your yard and when you're planning any kind of, you know, new setup or updating anything that didn't do well. To me, when you have a plant or an area where something failed, it's the perfect time to really kind of rethink what that scenario is. Like, is there a reason, as I'm looking at this space, why this plant would have, you know, not done well? You know, barring gophers or turkeys or, you know, in our area, that's a big deal. Like those are real conversations that need to be had. Certainly down in the Danville area, there's a lot of open space down here, Walnut Creek, Alamo. There's a lot, you have to contend with a lot of things. And while that's not climate related, I mean, I guess maybe it is if you think about it, possibly. And so, you know, really think about why those plants didn't do well there. Like, what is going on that makes sense here? Was it not getting enough water? Had I not, you know, given it enough fertilizing? Was the soil just not great to begin with and there were no changes made there? You know, if everything seems good and it's based on what we talk about, you know, then come down and let's chit chat about it. You know, so I always give Sloat Garden Center as my first resource, just because I feel like we are a wealth of information. And if we don't know, and again, we don't know everything there is to know about every situation, you know, please bring pictures, bring you know, bring cuttings, bring branches, bring leaves, like bring something that will kind of help explain whatever your question is. It really helps us to determine, you know, what the cause of things could be, to be able to give you just a little bit better educated advice on things. So we're always happy to help you. You know, we want you to be good gardeners, and that's our entire premise, is to give you the tools to be able to be the best gardener possible. So always start with your local Sloat Garden Center. There's plenty of us around. The Sunset Western Garden book. So we have one in the, I should have grabbed it. It's actually sitting right there on my shelf, but we have one that we have used in most of the Sloat stores for years. There are some that you can still get online, that you can order. They have a lot of their stuff online now, a lot of their information. It's not what it used to be. The whole Sunset kind of group has, gone more toward their magazine than toward a lot of their gardening stuff, but you can still find information on their website. But definitely, I wrote it down because it didn't make sense when I first had it. So for Sunset Western Garden, it's Sunset Gardens, and then you have to look up, like you have to go in and play with their tabs to be able to get to like plant suggestions, and you can go to where their zones are. That's probably one of the best ones. Actually, it's on my phone. I'm going to do it right here while we're sitting here. Forgive me. So it says, let's see, Sunset Plant Collection. And then that takes you to like climate zones. You can choose Northern California, you can choose, and then it gives you like all the zones, and then you can see like, okay, where I am, I'm like zone 14, and then you can click on 14, and then it brings up all this information from the Sunset website about, what that means, what the marine air is like. We're far enough away from the ocean that we don't have to worry about like salts and things like that you get a little bit closer to in the city and in, the North Bay. So they have a ton of information in there, and it shows you kind of what the range of like the location is, how large it is. And then they give you like all these plant recommendations, and you can click on them, get further information. They do a lot of, they rep a lot of Mediterranean climate plants. Again, like we talked about earlier, those are best for our area. They are, they grow best with our soil. They do best with our sun. They do, they still thrive even though we don't have as much rain as most other areas. So some really good recommendations on theirs. And you can kind of play with, the zones. You can kind of see from one to the other, what the differences are, if and when there are differences. And they have lots of really cool recommendations there. They also have like layout recommendations too. So really neat. And then the other one that we use all the time is the calscape.org, and that's through the California Native Plant Society. That website is amazing. It mostly lists, it does a lot of natives. It does a lot of also Mediterranean climate plants. It's a lot of really, really heavy drought tolerant. And same thing, you can go play on their website. And you can do some designs. You can, kind of set things up in, if I put this together with this. They have some information on like companion planting and things that will do well together, that will, kind of help support each other, so that you're using, as few pesticides as possible. Even though Sloat, reps pretty much 99% organic fertilizers and pesticides and insecticides and stuff, fungicides. There's definitely ways to do it without having to spray anything foreign at all. And there's lots of really good, recommendations and stuff within the Calscape website, also in Sunset. And the Sunset book is just a really good read too. I mean, it has lots of information about how to plant things, how to look at spacing, how to look at like dealing with wind breaks and things like that. Even recommendations for, what to plant with a retaining wall, like all sorts of good stuff. So start with us, but know that you can also use the Sunset Western Garden book. You can look online for them. You can go to the calscape.org website. And again, just really a wealth of information. And I think my last slide is just, hey, thanks. There we are. We'll help you grow the plants you love. Yeah, so again, like so much information, and just hard to put it all in easy pieces that make sense specifically for the East Bay. And I would say that more than anything, you're keeping in mind that We're not getting as much of that moist air. We don't have that marine layer that you get in San Francisco or on the North Bay. So everything is much drier. Everything is going to be, mostly self-irrigation, whether you're out there watering or using some kind of sprinkler system or some kind of drip line. Really pay attention to those, work on your soil, and work on just good decisions about where to put things. And, in order to work with the microclimate that we have in this area, you really just have to be cognizant of where you're planting and making sure that you keep things as healthy as possible and giving them kind of the best jump start that you can, especially now's such a great time to put stuff into the ground so that it's strong and established and ready to roll when that sun hits.
Yeah, super great. I just thought I would share my copy of the Sunset
Oh,
West.
yes.
Can you
Oh,
see it?
wow.
It's in like 20 pieces, because this is how often I refer to this book.
Yes.
It's like, and this is just one edition. I have like 2 other editions over there too. So
For sure. Yeah,
there's
we
a
all know
wealth
what
of
to get
information.
Jen for Christmas now. Jen needs a new Western Garden book, everybody.
No, I just need some tape.
Indeed.
Um, and then also Calscape too is
Oh,
incredible. And like Shannon said, it's all native plants, but what's nice is that you can put in if you want to attract hummingbirds or butterflies, or there's a bunch of filters if it's full sun, part sun,
yes.
good drainage, hillside, ground cover, whatever. You can put that in and it generates a list of plants for you. So we do have a couple questions. How can you tell when a plant is not thriving? What will it look like when a plant is not thriving in your microclimate?
Well,
How can you tell what the problem is, basically?
that's kind of tough. I start by ruling things out. I start by ruling out, okay, do you have any kind of wildlife in the area that could be the problem? I feel like often when plants just die out of nowhere, when they just start to deteriorate, in our area, because there's so many gophers and so many voles and moles and all this goodies kind of underground that are tearing at things, but specifically for gophers because they tend to go for roots. If you see any gopher mounds around, you really need to be careful. That's a big one. And it's the one thing where, like I said, you won't see anything. You might see a gopher mound, but if it's in an area that's kind of layered and there's lots of plants, you're not even going to see that. And so if you're at all concerned that that's a possibility, I always tell people, walk up to the plant and give it a little tug. If there's no root system left there, it's going to pull right out. And you'll know immediately, that that's one of the causes. Now, I get that that's not microclimate, but again, in the East Bay, there's just so many, there's so much wildlife and there's so many rodents within the soil. So always check that first. So if it's for our microclimate, you're most often going to see things that are getting burnt, that are suffering, or that are, that whatever their situation is based on microclimate. Again, it's been pretty cold this winter and there's been a lot of frost, but as cold as it's been, it hasn't been in that frost area that often. So for things during the winter, I would say, if things seem like they're not happy and it's kind of blackened and it almost looks like it's burnt, but it's the winter, it's probably frost burn. Some of that you can trim off, and then you really need to cover it. Cover it with a frost blanket, or you can use wilt stop and cloud cover and other things that are I always say it wrong, transparent. It kind of helps them to hang on to their moisture. So use either of those, products. Like I said, you can use a big frost cloth that you can just lay over, or with citrus, you even kind of wrap it around like a teepee, or I've seen people build shelters with stakes and then frost cloth over the top. So it's almost like like one of your pop-up tents that you take to the football game or whatever. So any kind of protection like that with frost cloth during the winter. But during the summer, you're just going to see it dry out. You're going to notice that doesn't seem like it's taking in water. It's going to start to get crackly on the edges. At first it'll start by drooping and it'll just be super sad. And again, sometimes you can balance it with, with a little extra watering, maybe giving it, like, again, making sure that it's getting fertilizing on a regular basis. But you'll start to see that cracking, you'll start to see that drying out. And those are the things that in our microclimate are really the big ones. Everything else tends to be, fairly mild. It's just those two, either the frost burn or the sunburn.
Yeah, and sunburn typically is it'll be in the center of the leaf.
Right.
It'll be like a burn mark in the center of the leaf. And then if it's water related, it tends to work in
On the edges,
outside from the edges in. So, and that's like under and over watering tend to have similar symptoms.
Yeah.
So you just have to pay attention to how much you're watering.
For sure.
Okay. So, and then this is a good question, and it also pertains to the city too, but
Yeah.
Oakland Hills has tons of eucalyptus trees. From what I researched, eucalyptus leaves are not great for vegetable gardens. Any recommendations? I'm assuming grow in containers and raised beds. Also, anything I can do to modify the soil. Eucalyptus leaves are in the soil or decomposed.
That is kind of a hard one.
Raised beds. I just say raised beds and just try to clear it off. The soil's inhospitable.
Yeah, I was trying to think of something that was, could kind of help change that pH level, but I don't know that there's anything that really is tough enough to combat, eucalyptus. I mean, redwoods are the same way. There's just so much acid. It can be really difficult to do anything right around the base within that root area. Definitely raised beds, which are not bad. I mean, it's an easy process. They're easy to build. We have a couple at Sloat that some of them are they're almost like ginormous felt bags. Some of them are really long and not, maybe 6 inches, but they're, 3, 4, 5, 6 feet long. We also have like the wooden ones that you can put together that are like a square or a rectangle. Some plastic ones that are very similar. Doing raised beds. I mean, we were doing some little like nursery visiting up in the North Bay for some training that we're doing in-house. And one of the nurseries that we visited had what they called a demonstration veggie garden. And theirs were all in like those old metal troughs, that you can get like at feed stores and stuff like that. And they were really cool. And there was lots of different veggies in there. There was plenty of space. So I think that there's lots of options, as it pertains to container gardening, even with veggies, which can take up some room. But, there's lots of really cool options out there, tons at Sloat and also a lot online. But, it would be so much elbow grease, and I don't even know whether you'd get there if you were going to try to fix the soil on your own.
Well, yeah, and another advantage to raised beds is that you can line them with gopher wire and stuff like that, so you can sort of double up on your on what's happening.
Yeah.
So this has been great. This is, we just wanted to have like a really sort of basic introduction on microclimates. And what I would say, just to support everything that Shannon's already shared, is that what I say as a designer is a really good thing to just look at what's growing in your neighborhood.
For sure.
Because even like she was saying, one neighborhood to the next can be different, slightly different. And so if your neighbor is growing something that you like successfully in the same sort of location that it would be in your garden, there's a really good chance it'll work in your garden. More so than, whatever. And then also repeating what works in your garden. So if you know that you've tried a certain plant 5 times and it hasn't worked, probably not the right plant for that space or your space. And so just trying to stick with what's successful. And I do want to remind everyone that we do have a design department, and we do have East Bay consultations now. We didn't, and it's kind of newish. And we're really excited because we're growing the department and in the East Bay a lot. And so that is available. We do have consultants that can come out to your garden and help with ideas or a drawing or whatnot. So thanks so much for joining us. And Shannon, thank you so much for your time and expertise. And then just a reminder that this is being recorded and the recording will be available this Friday, which is February 10th. And that's nice too, because if you can go back and rewatch and screenshot as needed for Shannon's slides. And we hope to see you at future webinars. I hope everyone has a good Wednesday evening.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.